there was a report from, I believe it was Nakos over at On3, listing candidates for Ohio State's vacant defensive coordinator job. And one of the names listed on there as a potential replacement, Chris Hampton, currently Oregon's defensive backs coach and co-defensive coordinator. Now, he came in from Tulane last year, and the defense took a sizable step forward. They took another step forward this year, and I think we're all hoping in a couple of specific moments, the biggest games of the season, the defense can take another step forward in the 2020, I'd say 6 season, but 25 as well. You never know. I'm not always right about things. I'd love to be wrong there, but we'll just have to see. We're less than 8 months away. We're around 8 months away. We will get there. I promise we will get there. But we'll also get to the point one day where Chris Hampton is no longer on Oregon staff. And this has not been necessarily imminent. It's just a name that got thrown out on a list, but it's not the first time his name has popped up for a Power 4 defensive coordinator position. The other one was Florida State. They hired a guy from Nebraska instead. I don't know if Ryan Day's actively considering Chris Hampton or if this is more just a, hey, this guy would make a lot of sense. But certainly I expect Hampton at some point to be a full-time coordinator somewhere. He'd be able to make more money and have more responsibilities as well, because I'm fairly certain. I frankly wasn't that sure in 2023, but in 24, I became certain, just, watching stuff and following along as closely as I could, trying to see how coaches were acting on the sideline. Tosh Lupoi's calling the defensive plays. It's not Dan Lanning. I don't believe it's Chris Hampton. But in 2023, I frankly wasn't entirely sure. But it felt like this year we saw a lot more of Tosh Lupoi with a play card and signal or relaying plays into Jeff Basso, who was one of the guys. He was the primary guy that had the play calls coming in through his helmet on defense there. So Hampton leaving one day, I mean, he just pulled off whatever you think of Oregon secondary right now. Chris Hampton played a pretty darn pivotal role in the best defensive back recruiting class Oregon has ever had. Ever. I don't think there is another class, frankly, that would be close. The next closest one would be, 2024's class. That would be the next closest defensive back haul. So they've loaded up at this position. He has recruited well. I think the secondary has certainly not had every single moment be their brightest, but overall, they have been quite good. And since Hampton came in, I've liked what he's brought to the table. But him getting lured away, yeah, it would make a whole heck of a lot of sense, and I think would then really allow us to directly assess Tosh Lupoi as a defensive coordinator. And I know some of you out there aren't super high on Tosh. I'd encourage you to go look at what the defense has been over the last few years, and also remember that Dan Lanning is not uninvolved with any of this. One of my least favorite narratives in media or online circles is, well, this coach isn't calling the plays, so what's he really doing? This drives me insane. If you do not believe that during the Ohio State game, they showed some of the conversations they had, but as the game is getting called, which we all know from, inside access that we all get, or peek behind the curtain rather, on Ducks versus them, they all hear each other and talk to each other on the headset. If you don't think Lanning is giving any input to Tosh, I think you were pretty crazy there. So if Hampton were to leave, it would be right back to, okay, there's nobody else there. Good, bad, indifferent, anything in between. This is just all on Tosh Lupoi. So we'll see if this ends up playing itself out. But right now, it kind of feels, I don't know where Ohio State is looking for their defensive coordinator. But where did their past defensive coordinator go? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Or maybe perhaps not. So there was a bit of coaching poaching, which is a rhyming term I just came up with and I'm way too proud of, that took place in the Big Ten. And Jim Knowles, who was the defensive coordinator at Ohio State this past year, he is now the defensive coordinator at Penn State. This is bad news for Oregon. No other way to slice it. Now, in the first matchup, after the first matchup with Ohio State, I should say, wouldn't have felt as bad about this, because maybe, if things had played out differently, if there'd still been a 14 playoff, the perception of Jim Knowles would be very different. But dating back to where he was before his time in Columbus, he was at Oklahoma State, and he was really, really good there as well. He is an excellent defensive play caller, clearly knows how to coach his guys up and have them ready to go. You give him a bunch of NFL players like Ohio State had this past year, and that's the result. National championship season. And Ryan Day, turns out, really good head coach. Chip Kelly, great offensive coordinator. Jim Knowles, great defensive coordinator. So after the first matchup, I wouldn't have been as worried about this. But after seeing what he did, making adjustments to what Oregon did the first time, and really what he did to everybody throughout Ohio State's championship playoff run, not wild about him now being over at Penn State, who Oregon has to play on the road next year. So that was already going to be Oregon's toughest game. And Jim Knowles being there absolutely makes it tougher, because as I talked about, I haven't watched every play back yet. It's still too fresh. Maybe once we turn to February, I'll go back and watch every play of the Rose Bowl and have some more thoughts and takeaways and such. But my biggest takeaway at the time, and the more I've let these thoughts marinate, the more I think that it is true, especially watching this whole playoff run for Ohio State and how it played out. Oregon got outcoached. So Jim Knowles, on that day, January 1st, 2025, it was him against Will Stein. And Jim Knowles won, and it wasn't particularly close. No points until the end of the first half with the final play and the 2-point conversion. Like, that was an exquisite coaching performance. They did that defense was really well coached. They avoided penalties. They played good assignment football. They had the right play calls. They passed off coverage as well. They anticipated things really well. Everything about that defense to me screamed, this is really, really good coaching. Now, the reason reportedly that he left Ohio State was strife with the coaches. He didn't get along with the defensive line coach, I don't think, or Ryan. I think it was more about the D-line coach. I'm not entirely sure, but essentially he's from Pennsylvania originally, so he's back close to home in Happy Valley, and now he is on a staff that I presume he'll be able to get along with better, but also a team that has national championship aspirations. And yeah, they lose a couple guys to the NFL draft like Abdul Carter, but they bring back a lot. 4 starters from their offensive line, Drew Aller at quarterback. They got some help with the portal at wide receiver. Penn State is absolutely loading up. So before all this went down, Penn State was Oregon's toughest game because it's a favorable schedule. And why I don't agree with the premise or with what ESPN has projected in their playoff that, Oregon can't get to 10-2. No, I think they can get to 10-2. I think if you gave them last year's schedule, maybe not. But even that schedule, it wasn't as bad as some of the other ones that I see across college football in the SEC, Big Ten, or even in the ACC. Miami's got a brutal schedule with how everything works out. They have 2 byes in a 3-week span, and then they play 7 straight games to end the year, and the final 2 of those games are on the road in conference play. So Oregon has gotten scheduling breaks each of the last couple of seasons. That won't always be the case, but this was always the toughest game, no matter how you looked at that schedule, because there's no Ohio State, there's no Michigan on it. And maybe Washington sneaks up and is tougher than some people might think. But now this game, absolutely tougher. Knowles is really good, and Will Stein will get a chance to make it 2-1 against him. Because first go round, I'm not saying that Knowles is just going to automatically clown Will Stein again and, hold Oregon's offense scoreless in the first half. Now it's going to be on the road, so everything is going to be more difficult. But first matchup, Autzen Stadium, advantage Will Stein significantly. This is the second time that Oregon beating Ohio State in the regular season has caused a shakeup on the defensive staff. The shakeup this time around in the 2024 season was they have to make some schematic changes. They started blitzing a little bit more, not just sitting off in coverage and always just rushing 3 or 4 and dropping 8. They brought a little more pressure, and that really worked. They played a little bit more aggressively. And back in 2021, it was get rid of then defensive coordinator, I don't remember his name, and bring in Jim Knowles because he's really, really good. So he's at Penn State now, and that's just not great. There's no other way to slice it. Not great, Bob. Not great. Tougher. I believe in Oregon's ability to go there and win that football game. I'm not making a prediction right now. I'm just saying I don't look at that and say, it's automatically a loss. No, it's a losable game. Oregon will probably be an underdog. Could they win it? Yeah, it's still James Franklin and Penn State playing what will likely be a very big football game. Their track record there isn't very good, but bringing a guy like Jim Knowles helps a whole heck of a lot.